Hello and welcome to the latest Real Deals webinar in association with Humatica. I'm Talya Misiri, editor of Real Deals, and today I'm joined by Andros Payne, founder and managing partner at Humatica, Joost Heermans, partner at Gilde Buyout Partners, and Dr. Thomas Costa, former CEO of Coventya. So today we're going to be discussing all things buy and build and accelerated buy and build, looking throughout the process and how we work to ensure that businesses emerged in the best way possible. But before we start, perhaps because great to have you on with me today. Perhaps you could each give a quick introduction to yourselves and your firm, and then we'll get into the discussion. So Andros, could I pass on to you first?
Yeah, thank you, Talya. I am with Humatica. I've been with the firm for 18 years, and we are focused on helping private equity sponsors and their portfolio company leaders to improve the effectiveness of their organizations to be able to implement value creation plan.
Great, thank you, Andros. And Joost?
Yeah, so my name is Joost Heermans. I'm now with Gilde Buyout Partners for about 5 years. Gilde is a mid-market private equity firm with about 3.5 billion euro in assets under management. We operate in the Benelux, in the DACH region, as well as in Italy. Before my career at Gilde, I worked for about 10 years in consulting. I'm leading Gilde's portfolio team, our value creation team, of about 5 people, and I work day to day with our management teams to identify and unlock value.
Great. Look forward to hearing from you more as we go on. Thanks, Joost. And last but not least, Thomas, hi.
Hi. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm Thomas Costa. I'm a chemist by training. I have run a specialty chemical company called Coventya for the last 25 years. Thereof 21 years as the CEO under LBO. So I did 4 cycles with different sponsors. And in the course of the business of the cycle, we did about 20 plus acquisitions and integrations. So that's my expertise and my contribution today.
Great. Look forward to hearing from you as well. Thanks, Thomas. So thank you all. And just a quick note to our listeners, we will be taking audience questions at the end. So if you have any, please do send them through, and we'll do our best to answer those as well. So I'm keen to get stuck in straight to the conversation. So perhaps we could all think about first, why choose buy and build as a strategy? What are the key advantages here? Joost, could I come to you first?
Yeah, I think as every private equity firm has different strategies, right? So you have growth capital and VC, and you have more restructuring type of PE. But at least for our firm, we do mid-market PE in Northwest Europe and Italy. And for us, what works really well is buy and build, because we have typically a holding period of, let's say, 5 to 7 years. And in this short time frame to create value, you need to work fast and hard. And buying companies and integrating them and realizing the synergies is still one of the quickest ways to realize value. That's easier said than done, and we'll talk about a lot more about it today. But it is as simple as that, because it creates a bigger, more stable company that can better cope with risks, and also better attract talent, which is very important nowadays. So yeah, all in all, a very much pulled value creation lever.
Definitely. I think, as you said, that talent stream is a very important one that we'll get onto a bit later on as well. And then Thomas and Andros, what are your thoughts? Why a buy and build strategy successful? What are the advantages of them?
Well, when we started our LBO, we were basically a European country, active in 3 countries, and the forward to create value was to globalize it. We were number 10, 11 in the world market, according to our data. So we did all those acquisitions to develop a global footprint. This took quite a while. So on average, as you can see, we did 1 acquisition per year. We couldn't handle very much more. At the end of the cycle, when we sold the company this year, we were number 3 in the world market, and was only possible through acquisitions and integrations and technology rollout in the newly acquired.
Sure. Yeah, really interesting. So that geographic expansion was certainly kind of a big value creation lever via the buy and build.
Talya, from my perspective, just a couple of thoughts on that. I think having observed the private equity markets over the past almost 20 years, I think buy and build offers still an option of growing value in an increasingly crowded market where there's more and more capital deployed. And we see that strategy being used more often. I think it has the aspect of, on the one hand, is what Joost referred to as de-risking and a portfolio company, but also the multiple expansion that you can realize through building a larger entity that has more demand in the financial markets with so much money to be deployed.
Definitely. And Andros, I know we don't plan on speaking about the pandemic too much today, but what have you seen? Have you kind of seen a growth since the pandemic, or perhaps now in this post-COVID environment? Has there been more buy and build activity?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting development, because originally back in the beginning of 2020, we felt that we didn't know exactly what would happen to deal making and buy and builds as a result of COVID. And our hypothesis is that, things are going to slow down dramatically. And they did for a very short period of time. But after that, I would say they picked up steam, and we've never seen the markets as busy as they are currently with regard to buy and build strategies and implementing them. There's just an enormous amount going on.
Definitely. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. Sorry.
One other addition to that, I think maybe that is as a result of some polarization in the markets, where the firms that have done very well through COVID have the financial means and they have the confidence to go out and buy up other competitors that may not have done quite as well.
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of opportunity now.
Technology helps a lot. I mean, when we sold the company this year, until there was practically no physical visit, all was done by electronic data room, etc. You could not imagine that even 5 years ago, I think.
No, exactly. And do you think you're still able to do the same assessments via just the kind of virtual aspect?
Well, I think you discover most of the things you need. I always have learned that even with the best due diligence, you get 85% of the truth. The rest is something you find out afterwards when you talk to people. But you have to manage that. But I think the data quality you can present today, what it means is very high. Yeah,
definitely. And now, so kind of we've talked of the high level advantages, but perhaps what are some of the risks of a buy and build strategy, and what kind of challenges could investors face? Thomas, can I come to you first, and then Joost, if you could follow on this one?
Well, as I said, I think most of the acquisitions, I would say almost all, have worked. They have always taken more time and effort to make them work, mostly more time, and you have more surprises than you thought. But at the end of the day, it's a very valid strategy if you stay with your knittings, I mean, we only bought companies exactly in our field. We knew exactly who they were, what they were doing. We understood the end markets. So that was our way of minimizing risk. And then we had a small team of experts who immediately after closing jumped in and helped building groups and doing the integrations. Everything was very well prepared.
I couldn't agree more. I think what Thomas says is what we call best practice. I think in reality is what we see is that most acquisitions work, but some not. And I think the common denominator there is culture, right? So we always say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but it's true. It's really true. If you have two companies and they can even be in the same field, but they have a completely different culture in terms of decision making, try to combine them, it will be a disaster, not only for the target company, but also for the mother company. And that's where we've learned a lot over the past years.
Definitely.
That's why I see as risk number 1, 2, and 3 This culture.
Culture. Yeah, really interesting. And I assume kind of that comes into all stages and all kind of parts of the business as well. So it's not just looking at kind of how the management teams operate, but also the other kind of broader functions within the business as well. Is that correct?
Yes, no, it definitely starts with the management team. I think when you assess the target company, of course, you talk with management and you look at the data, etc. But the way the management team presents the company and then presents the team itself, you can already read a lot from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to go deeper than that. You have to talk to the second and the third layer and really assess the structures beneath it. And then see if it fits with your own company.
Definitely. And Andros, from your perspective, where can the trouble start? What kind of challenges or risks should investors be aware of when going into a buy and build?
Yeah, well, I would agree with Joost on this, that I do think that the most common risk that emerges is there's an underestimation of the importance of getting collaboration and a clear objective set between the merging company's senior management team. And if there is any kind of even implicit issues that come up or not voiced, that's the root cause oftentimes of developing mistrust in the most senior levels of the company. And if that starts to take root, then it can lead to all kinds of other problems in decision making and collaboration throughout the rest of the company, in fact, and all the other decisions around how do we integrate the go-to-market structures, the sales force, all the other functions. There's hundreds and hundreds of decisions to be made, and the best decisions are made by having the qualified subject matter experts from both firms really assess the options and make a clear objective decision. And that's all clouded and all complicated if we don't have, as a foundation, trust, which starts at the top.
Yeah, completely. Anything to add there, Thomas, or just an agreement?
I fully agree with Andros. I noticed a difference in the type of acquisition you do. I mean, we were a small company and we started out. We never added business that was more than 10% of our then existing platform. Just overstress it. Those were more simple to manage. It still needs a good hand, understanding, a lot of presence of the CEO. We bought smaller companies, family, founder owned and managed, and that was all a change in culture. Yeah. When we merge companies of the same size, it's a little bit different because you get immediately into the field of politics. And that's what I learned. An outside view is of value because nobody of the people coming from the outside has a vested interest in a position, in something coming forward. It adds more objectivity. Yeah. And when we had those situations, I would always go back and have a third party help us and get a professional look.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the size issue is definitely something to consider there, where perhaps but bolting on a company of a smaller size can tend to be easier to do, as opposed to kind of those similar type businesses can be quite challenging to navigate. Okay.
Maybe one thing to add on is also with smaller companies, they can be very entrepreneurial, which I think is a good thing, right? And they are used to a certain degree of freedom. So I think managing that and then not smothering it with all kind of processes or demands from the mothership, I think is very important.
Yeah, definitely, kind of maintaining that entrepreneurial spirit.
Well, you know what, the sad news about that is, and I agree fully with this entrepreneurial spirit, which we loved. I mean, these people were successful because they were entrepreneurs. You always lose some people on this road because you need to have certain processes, reporting, etc., and not every middle managers wants to accept that. So statistically, and regretfully maybe, you lose 10-15% of middle management because they just
Yeah, definitely. And I'm keen to kind of discuss the management and maintaining and retaining talent shortly. But just quickly before we get on to that, Andros, could you tell us a bit more about kind of how you go about setting target operating models? Could you give us a bit of an overview there?
Yeah, I do think that depends a lot on the type of buy and build acquisition that's done. We've talked about incremental bolt-ons, what Thomas referred to, less than 10% of the platform revenue versus other more transformational bolt-ons where they're two equal partners, and these have differences in the way that you would want to proceed. On the incremental bolt-on, things like the target operating model are given by the mothership pretty much, and you're not going to completely change the mothership based on the acquisition unless there's something really, really special in there that you think you want to adopt. Now, the merger of equals, that's a different story, because I would say almost all cases, both the firms have been successful. Otherwise, they wouldn't be an acquisition and merger. However, they've probably been successful in quite different ways, subtle ways that are not really documented, that are kind of tribal knowledge in each of the firms. And I think a foundational element in managing those types of mergers is to really get complete fact-based transparency, objective transparency for both the merging firms upfront ahead of time. And I think this helps in getting a lot of the potential sources for misunderstanding out on the table explicitly at the beginning. It kind of takes the air out of it takes the pressure out of the balloon, so that you don't have any seeds planted for misunderstanding that could, in the worst case, spiral into mistrust. And so that seems to be, in our view, one of the simple mechanisms. It takes maybe a few weeks to do that, but it can save months.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly important to get that set up early on, so it can kind of feed through into the process. And so from my opinion, it seems like the managing and choosing the right management team during a buy and build process is probably perhaps one of the most challenging or one of the most tricky things to navigate. Joost, do you agree, or how, in your experience, have you gone about kind of choosing the right management team, ensuring kind of the right people are at the top to be able to kind of merge those businesses?
Yeah, again, I think we have to distinguish between having the platform company and then doing a string of pearls, right? So many bolt-on acquisitions, or you do the transformational merger. I think in the first, yes, we definitely look at the right person from the start. So we want to see the deal captain or the deal champion, or the person who's going to lead this. And it has to be someone that is a bit almost too big for the company who's leading it now, right? So who is very visionary, who says, okay, I know these 5 or 6 companies I want to add on. I know the managers, I know how to do this. And then joined as in with many portfolio companies with a very strong CFO, right? So a proven, a private equity CFO that knows how to acquire these companies. Of course, we're here to help as well, right? We will do the whole valuation and the financing and all the due diligence work streams we can do. But in the end, it is much better if the CFO does it himself or herself. So we look at this couple that will need to have a very strong platform company, but also have the vision and the capabilities to actually execute the buy and build strategy. I think in the latter, in the transformational setting, it can be very different, right? So if you really have a merger of equals, you have basically 2 management teams, and you have to create one out of them. And maybe the person you thought could be the perfect CEO for the new entity is not the one. That's why you actually need a very transparent, fact-based approach that Andros just said, and the outcome could surprise you.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Joost. And Thomas, from your perspective, how, and you mentioned earlier kind of some of the mid management sometimes will look to leave the business during a buy and build process, or if they know another business is being merged on. From your experience, how have you looked to retain talents within a firm during a buy and build process?
Well, I would say in the majority of cases, we were lucky insofar as the seller of the business stayed on. In private equity, have something wonderful to turn them into shareholders. That is such a powerful tool nobody else has. In our last, we had 135 shareholders out of 680 employees. And that's a life insurance for talent, because once you are a shareholder, it's more than money. It's your lifeblood that is in the company. So that's a key ingredient. And a lot of the people whose companies we bought turned part of the proceeds into shares. So, we never really had an issue to find new management. Very rarely we took people from the outside, with the only exception, the CFOs. Because as you rightly said, this is a very crucial function. And those talents you don't find in smaller companies. So the two gentlemen I worked with had both come from the outside with experience from M&A advisors or from banks.
Sure. Okay, so they kind of have to have seen it happen and know the process to be able to come in at that level.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Sure. And Andros, from your perspective, is this one of the most challenging, kind of getting the management team right in a merger? Is this one of the most challenging aspects?
It's the most important thing. I mean, production is quite straightforward. Marketing, you know how that is done. But if you are a global company and you have to have a guy who knows the culture of his country, how do you find an LBO-proven general manager for China, for Korea, or India? Those are huge challenges, and they take time. And as you said before, time is critical because you don't have lots of it. And I have always seen that in the first year after an acquisition, there's always something happening. You have always a little bit of a dip. So in the last year, you don't do an acquisition, because if you buy 1 year before the exit, the true value of the acquisition is not visible. So out of a 5-year cycle, you have 4 years to act. So you have to have a list always updated, the Christmas list, the shopping list. So when you cycle, you start on day one. Yeah,
that makes sense. A great analogy there. And Andros, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of how firms go about choosing the management team in a merger?
Yeah, I think inherently there's a big challenge that takes place in these transformational mergers, because there's the senior management finds itself in a bit of a predicament. They say, look, we can't involve a broader set of managers to define what the future structure will be, which defines also, therefore, the competencies that you would need in that structure, and therefore the managers that fit in that future structure. They feel reluctant to do that because of the old adage of not inviting the turkeys to Thanksgiving. You know, how can we do that to involve those managers in a discussion which could result in their roles being made redundant? You know, obviously they're going to be, the fear is that they're going to be completely biased in that whole discussion, and you will not develop a model and the roles that are really the best for the company moving forward. That fear often leads to just a very narrow set of people, 1 or 2 people, sketching out what the future model should be, and defining in a very small group who's going to fulfill, who the managers to fulfill the key roles, and then just springing it on the organization. And this is oftentimes the root cause of a lot of problems, because essentially they're making those critical decisions about the management without the benefit of having transparency on, or having worked a little bit with those manager candidates. So the preferred approach that we would suggest to our clients is that there is an open, transparent, highly structured process for managers from both organizations to think about what's the required structure for the future, what does that imply about the roles that are needed, the competencies, the skills, and then as a third step, to systematically select the managers from within the organizations who best qualify for those roles. And that process is proven, although, you know, obviously there are some managers that through that process will have to leave the company. That can happen, that's clear. But with that kind of structured process and transparent process, their departure, the acceptance level is much higher and the disruption is much lower. And there's a clear understanding about the economic rationale and the process by which those difficult decisions are made. And we find that leads to, really, in these transformational mergers, the best possible managers in the right kind of roles to really execute the value creation plan going forward.
Definitely. You kind of need the best people to be able to continue with that kind of newly formed group, that newly formed business. And yeah, I guess unfortunately, as you say, there kind of can be losses along the way if certain individuals don't fit that new vision. Okay, and now
maybe one other thing, Talya, on this. There's one element of how do you get the right people in the right roles. There is another element that we routinely observe in post-merger integration, is that there can be one or the other disruptive manager.
Okay.
Can be many reasons for that. If they feel insecure, a number of different reasons. And I think as important it is to get the right people in the right roles through a systematic process, it's also important to take care of disruptors very quickly in a proper way, and not let them really jeopardize the integrity of the process.
Yeah, definitely. Joost, Thomas, any views on that?
Yeah, just in my observation, it's very important, even you have a new org chart and you want to do it rather quickly to remove uncertainty. Still, you have to give yourself time for discussion. I mean, I've always learned quality beats time all the time. And it's not surprising that very often after 1 or 1.5 years of this reorganization, there's a second org chart, because not all of the guys you put on in the boxes did really fulfill all the expectations. So you have to, as a CEO, you have to be very present in this first phase after the reorganization to see how people and the talents evolve. And sometimes you have to correct a slight error in assessment in the first place.
No, I see the same. I think the tendency of our CEOs is a bit like, how difficult can it be, right? You have two organizations in case of the transformational merging, and I know who the good guys are, right? So I'm just going to put them in boxes, and I know the operating model, where you have a COO and marketing, sales, and they draw it and they say, okay, this is it. And then, that's not the case. I mean, you can implement it, but the chaos, the disruption will be immense. I mean, these people, yes, they have all of a sudden new responsibility, new teams underneath them, but they don't understand the processes underneath them, right? So how do they interact with their colleagues? How does the substructures look like? And I think that is one we want to find out before we implement the target operating model.
Okay.
Culture, just coming back to culture, when you do that on a global scale, it is incredible what kind of mistake one can do if you do master the other culture on the other side. I mean, we all know that a hi in Japanese does not mean yes. It means I saw your lips moving. That's all. And unless you have a person who has lived in different cultures and then merge a global organization, I mean, there are so many mistakes you can do in a month, and they're hard to correct. And then the good ones leave the ship. So it's a very delicate process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of as mentioned previously, kind of the three things to consider first are our culture and making sure the culture are aligned between the businesses. Andros, what are your thoughts on this? How have you got any kind of examples, or how best can management teams and firms go about kind of getting these soft factors right around culture and across the merged businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody understands that culture is important. However, if you ask 10 people to describe exactly what that means, you probably have 10 different answers.
Yeah.
At least the view that we take is to look at the perspective, culture from the perspective of how are decisions made and implemented within an organization. And here you can have huge variance. If a firm is spun out of a large international conglomerate, most likely they do things in a very formal way. with meetings, with structures in place. And if you have a smaller entrepreneurial company, they don't have any patience for meetings and no need for meetings, and they do just fine. Yeah, they do things very informally and quickly, and that's really a unique competitive advantage. But we really focus on this whole aspect of what are the specific behaviors which drive the way in which the company, the group, makes and implements decisions. And by looking at it that way, it's possible to really benchmark very concrete types of behaviors, like how many meetings do you have, or informal interactions? Do you document meeting results? You know, very pragmatic things that can differ greatly between companies. And I would say if you know those differences ahead of time and you can share those between the merging companies, and they can look at it objectively and say, hey, you know, we needed to be, for example, more flexible and have less structured meetings. People were sick and tired of sitting in meetings and weren't knowing what they were doing. Let's learn from the other company and get that out on the table. That can be, you know, very helpful in merging cultures, is to make it more pragmatic and bring it into numbers and share it between the companies ahead of time.
Definitely. So I guess, are you saying, Andros, differences in culture if we're kind of looking at culture as how companies make decisions and how their kind of day-to-day operations are run, if there are differences, doesn't necessarily mean those businesses shouldn't be merged. They still can cooperate and kind of optimal decisions can be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like many other synergies, if you can take the best behaviors and the best behaviors in the context of where you want to take the company, all of these things are in the context of the value creation plan. But if you can make those behaviors explicit, we've seen examples where, because of that, the company has defined, okay, here's the way we want to work. Here's some, for example, anchoring it in the values of how they want to work in the future combined. And this is very helpful, you know, getting the things on the table in the beginning, because it's a type of thing where, you know, give a pragmatic example. If a company has never had any formal meetings, they're acquired by a firm that's spun out of a conglomerate that only makes decisions in meetings. And you could very easily have a misunderstanding of saying, this acquirer is just totally slow and bureaucratic and everything else, all the negatives. And then you're on that path down, distrust and not collaborating, not appreciating where the other firm is coming from and why they are that way.
Definitely. And Joost, what's your experience of this? So kind of how have you seen firms get culture right when it's kind of merging two businesses, or what are the challenges of getting kind of a combined culture between them?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Andros says, right? Try to approach it from a fact base, because I mean it's hard.
Yeah.
We have a lot of biases, right? And if you put two groups together, it already helps, you know, if they talk about who they are and what they find important and how they see the future, that already helps. But still, you sometimes don't get the truth on the table, right? So I think a fact-based approach can be a survey, can be many interviews, but just also looking at the data, the performance, right? I think definitely helps. And if you have a common understanding of the fact-based, and that's the starting point for discussions, I think that helps. Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Definitely. It's kind of not quantifying it, but setting out what defines culture and then how to work them together. Any additional thoughts on that, Thomas?
Well, you know, we were a little bit fortunate insofar as we survived a lot of LBO cycles. So in our first one, we already decided that we wanted to establish a certain management codex, which we did. And after every acquisition, the hypos, the young ones, they were sent as a group and as an international group for a 10-day management decision-making seminar where they learn how to work together, how to make decisions. This has been a fantastic tool. And over time, I can say all the managing directors in our local affiliates basically were brought up inside and learned how we think business should be managed. But that's a luxury. But it's a wonderful tool.
Definitely, that sounds really interesting, and I'm sure something that many businesses can benefit from as well. Okay, great. Now, in terms of kind of other functions within the business, Joost, obviously, when merging two businesses, there's also the sales and marketing functions to look at. How easy is that to do? Obviously, I'm sure it differs between different types of businesses. But what's your experience of merging sales and marketing functions?
Yeah, I think the way we approach mergers is that that we always look at where the value is, right? So we structure our integration around the value pools, as we call them. So if it's a revenue growth merger, you want to keep everyone on board and focus not on cost, then you very much focus on, for example, cross sales, right? So you structure your work streams around, how can I cross sell my products in different markets?
Yeah.
And if it's a cost merger, if you say, well, these companies are very much alike, but I see, merging the two SG&A, I can cut half of it. Then you structure your work streams around that. So let's say if in a merger, sales and marketing is a huge value driver, then there will be a separate work stream. And then, it depends, right? So if you say, we don't need everyone, right? We don't need two of the sales and marketing teams. Then we'll just, design a work stream to design how, who do you want to keep on board and who do you want to let go? If you say, well, actually, we need everyone because we are in a hyper growth market and we need to structure differently, then that will be the objective. So it very much depends.
Definitely. And Josh, any thoughts on that in terms of the merging of sales and marketing functions there?
Yeah, I think the complexity goes up if you have different go-to-market approaches that you're gonna merge, or you have mixed go-to-market approaches in two different companies. For example, if two companies are both going indirect through distributors, then you have to clean up the whole distributor. How do you avoid pushing off and insulting one set of distributors and maintain them? I mean, this gets fairly complex, especially if you have different brands that you're going to put through different distributors. Some go direct, some go through distributor. You can't have conflict there. I mean, this generally, I would say, is some of the more complex things to master in the post-merger integration. What we have found that, lo and behold, not rocket science, go to the customers and talk to them about it, and the distributors, and get their point of view on things before you actually put them in practice. It sounds quite simple, but it's amazing that oftentimes, especially go-to-market, will be sketched out again on the back of an envelope in a closet and then sprung on the company, and lo and behold, volume starts to drop off in some of your channels. I mean, it sounds crazy, but truly see that, and go to the customers and bounce some ideas off them and your distributors on what the future setup could look like merged, and how it would work, and what kind of rules of engagement are in place. I think all those things are quite simple, but and they make great sense.
Yeah, definitely. You can't lose anything from gaining more customer information and providing information. You can only benefit from that, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of these things, especially with go-to-market, perception can become reality, and you can't control the communications as well as you can internally. So you really do want to upfront understand the sensitivities and maybe even test some ideas on what your go-to-market setup, the merged go-to-market setup, direct, indirect, online, for example, how you're going to segment that and do it ahead of time. Yeah,
definitely. Great, thanks, Andros. And then we were kind of going through the different areas of consideration here, but governance is clearly a key area to consider as well. And I know we've kind of touched on it when we're talking about culture and decision-making processes. But Thomas, perhaps I can come to you first in terms of how best should companies go about looking at governance and putting processes in place?
Yeah, well, that's indeed a vast subject. I mean, we used to have a very small holding company, and our local affiliates operated independently in their markets. They had their budgets, their targets, they had their management ordinances, and holding managers would sit basically in the boards and do quarterly business reviews. From a corporate point of view, obviously you have a supervisory board composed of mostly the investors, some experts, and the CEO and the CFO. For us, it has worked quite straightforward. It has become a little bit more complex in recent years with the rise of ESG as a separate subject that is still, I would say, in a certain infancy in private equity. But it's because otherwise you will not get funds from the general partners. But from our point of view, it was a rather simple exercise.
Sure, fair enough. Joost, any experience there? Any kind of different opinions to Thomas in terms of different sizes of businesses and how to look at the governance within those?
Sure. No, we have a very clear tiered governance structure. So indeed, at the highest level, we have the supervisory board, which is mainly us, and indeed some industry or functional experts, and the CEO and CFO.
Sure.
Coming together 4 or 5 times per year, mainly on strategic topics, major management appointments or budgeting. I think then we have a monthly shareholder meeting, which is more operational. So we go through the current trading of the last month, but especially on the strategic agenda. So if there is bolt-on M&A or big integration projects that will be on the strategic agenda, and we go through it for about 1.5 hours, where the CEO or more management members will present the progress of their strategic initiatives. And then if you're in the midst of a post-merger integration, there will be more meetings, right? So typically I will be on the steering committee together with the consultant, if there is in the integration, together with the CEO to keep the pulse of the integration.
Okay, really interesting. Wow, so kind of a set structure there, and I guess that kind of helps to stop any issues arising kind of further down the line, and can continually reassess how the business is doing.
Correct.
Talya, I would like to maybe add a couple of comments on the governance of the integration process itself, because it seems not the long-term governance that Thomas has talked about, but how to govern the process. And here again, there seems to be quite simple approach to ensure that there is something like a transformation board or an integration board that is composed, that is clearly visible to all project participants in the merger, and has a clear remit that's seen as fair, because there are representatives of both firms in that board. And that board should absolutely have the final say on critical decisions around structures, substructures, critical roles, and appointments. And this needs to be really communicated, that this joint board has to have this final say, has to be communicated throughout the organizations to avoid managers making ad hoc decisions, even de facto decisions, by informally promising certain roles or appointments to certain members of the people around them, so that honestly can also lead to huge misunderstanding and a breakdown of trust. So this transformation board or an integration board, it plays an absolutely critical role to ensure that those kind of ad hoc decisions that can derail the process don't occur. Definitely.
And Andros, what types of people should be on this kind of a transformation or integration board, in terms of people from within the company and investors? Which job roles should be involved?
Well, people that are clearly seen as being very competent and have all the credibility in their respective organizations, preferably also in the acquired organization or the acquirer organization. So maybe through the industry, their industry experience, they're recognized in the other firm. Subject matter experts, great communicators, they really got to be the best of the best.
Mm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be people that are going to occupy specific senior roles in the future combined organization, because that group should be formed early on, and their remit should be communicated early on in the overall merger process, so that it just ensures that the signaling into both organizations is that they will have a representative, they will have a voice. It's not going to be one taking over the other, and they are somehow the perception of being treated unfairly should be reduced.
I agree. We usually form steering committees composed of people from both organizations. They were formally announced on our company intranet, so it's very transparent. And after every meeting of the steering committees, the results were published. As good, right? Work in progress, obviously you would not, but tendencies or certain decisions, they were communicated to the whole group, to the whole company. And that typically was very well accepted.
Really interesting, really interesting. And I guess, kind of both what you've said, Thomas, and what Andros was saying about kind of having that shared board, that shared group, does lead to kind of encourages early collaboration from the start, so that the businesses don't feel like they're still working in silos, even when they've been kind of merged together. Especially, I think now when you've got certain businesses that don't have an office environment, for example, and they kind of know that their business is merged with another, but they're still continuing to do what they used to do beforehand. It's quite an interesting point in there. Okay, and then we're coming round to the exit process. So where does buy and build come into exit strategies, perhaps? Joost, maybe could we get a view from you in terms of how does buy and build overall really help with multiples on exit? How much value does it actually create?
Yeah, so I think we talked already about how it creates value, right? I think what we also talked about is the multiple arbitrage. I mean, still you try to buy a lower multiple than the platform. And then hopefully at the end of your 5-6 years, you have a larger, more diversified, less risk prone company with still a bright future ahead, right? So, and I think it's all about timing that, right? So you should, like Thomas said, you shouldn't do probably a deal just before exit, because it doesn't create a lot of value.
Yeah.
So you really want to make sure that the companies are well integrated. I think we've seen the quality of DDs at such a high level nowadays that you cannot get away with a bunch of companies that are not integrated. You will definitely get a discount on the value of your company.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you can prove, look, this is one integrated company with a coherent strategy, and everything is aligned. But you also want to leave something on the table for the next owner, right? So there should be still a clear path of value creation ahead, which again, buy and build can be part of that. Or you could have some synergies left on the table, right? So if there are more difficult synergies to get, for example, on the tech side, I think that's typically one that takes a bit longer. You could choose to say, okay, I'm going to leave this to the next owner who's maybe more capable to unlock that.
Really interesting. Yeah.
Just to underline this with numbers, I did this after the closing of our transaction. Looking back to 21 years of LBO, if you look at the CAGR in sales, we had 7%. 2/3 of it was organic, 1/3 came through acquisition.
Okay.
The CAGR in EBITDA was 9%, so a little bit of a scale effect could have been, but it was 9%. But on equity, it was 14%. So, and that's the multiple arbitrage, because obviously otherwise there would not be a different number between EBITDA, CAGR, and equity. But the company that had a strong position worldwide, multiple technologies of advanced rollouts status. So buy and build was a true value creator.
Yeah, and really impressive. Yeah, it certainly kind of shows in the figures there. And then Andros, what are your views on this kind of when planning for exit? Is it beneficial for businesses to have other kind of roll-up candidates in the pipeline? What have you seen around this?
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense. You need to have that future story ready to go. What are the candidates for the next owner? And I think everything that's been said both by Joost and Thomas here, I would completely support. I mean, you need to, especially having observed this over many years now, I think the need to get the companies really integrated in a solid way ahead of the exit is quite important. So you would want to get about a year to a year and a half of good results under the merged entity before exiting, and use that time to also accumulate your thoughts on what are the next firms that you would want to buy and add on to the company.
Definitely. And then Thomas, overall thoughts in terms of clearly the numbers talk for themselves, but what is the best way to consider buy and build at exit?
Luck. I think without luck, all the efforts don't work. I mean, who would have guessed after COVID 2020 that 2021 was such a wonderful exit year, right? So, even 6 months before signing, we would not have dreamt about. So, I mean, joking aside, obviously it needs a conscious management style, always be ready. And you know, when the clock advances, when you're in year 4, you know something's going to happen. So you have to prepare the teams, you have to prepare your whole structure, polish, make sure that everything is in order, there are no loose ends, and then happens what happens, right? But that's more of the sponsor side, because the driver for an exit in most cases is the sponsor, let's face it.
Yeah, true. Perfect.
We would always say it's a joint decision.
Well, thank you, Joost.
Great. Okay, we've got a couple of audience questions that have come in, so I'll just put these to you. More's coming. Thank you for sending those in, everyone. So the first one, it came in quite early on, was around what are the most common tech stack integration challenges that your portfolio companies face when involved in a buy and build. Joost, perhaps we start with you, and then Andros, if you've got any opinions there.
Yeah, I already said something about it, right? I think that this is a difficult one because for us, because let's say we've been burnt in the past with complex tech integrations, right? Whether it's really, you know, you want to merge 2 ERP systems or choose one ERP system and do a whole change at one of the companies, or it's a more complicated one where you really have a software or tech business and you want to kind of merge the 2 developing entities, where there's a lot of critical and very kind of much wanted talent. So I think that this has a very kind of high barrier if we want to merge this. So we structure our integration effort around the value pools, and most of the times the value pools are either in sales and marketing or operations, or, you know, closing a plant or what have you, or cross sales. If there's huge value to gain about, you know, choosing one of the 2 ERP systems or merging the tech teams, we will structure it around it, but the bar is much higher just because of the complexity.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything to add, Andros or Thomas?
I mean, from my perspective, I have seen the challenge in technology integration, and it goes beyond technology, because the technology is underlying processes and other, you know, drives productivity to a large extent, and it's not uncommon that these risks that are associated with the synergies that people are thinking about are completely misjudged because of the technology platforms which are underlying this. And it comes down to proper tech DD to really look at, you know, what's required in merging. If merging and the productivity improvements from merging or effectiveness improvements from merging are critical for the value creation plan. Definitely. And then going on to our second audience question, one that says, how do you see technology improving the efficiency of the M&A process? Andros, what are your thoughts on that? Well, I do think that probably Joost as a sponsor will have a better view on that, but yeah, it does seem that, you know, all the quote, wasted time of traveling around has been cut out of the process. And it's made it very efficient now with the platforms that are available, including the communications platforms like what we're using right now, to get a lot of information. I mean, a real huge amount of information required to judge risks and make decisions. There is, however, I would say always, at least what we hear from the markets, that there's an element that you just can't cover with technology today, and that is really meeting people face to face, looking them in the eye, and seeing, do they look straight at you in the eye or do they look somewhere else?
True.
That element is a tough one over technology.
Sure. And Joost, anything to add to that in terms of how technology has kind of made the process more efficient?
No, I mean, it's incremental efficiency, I have to say. I mean, the M&A process in and of itself didn't change a whole lot over the past decade, right? I mean, you look at a company, it's a highly structured process in terms of DD, right? You have your legal DD, your financial DD, commercial DD, operational DD, environmental DD, organizational DD, what have you. And they've become broader and I think also deeper. But that process hasn't changed, right? And also the time it usually takes. I think what has changed, it has just become more efficient, right? And especially in COVID, the exchange of data, through platforms has been very, very efficient. The access to management is much better. So I think the process in and of itself is much more efficient. 10-20% efficiency gain. But the process in and of itself hasn't changed that much.
Sure. And then a quick fire, we've only got a couple of minutes, but a quick fire question maybe to anyone who can answer in terms of what do you think the next big sectors are for buy and build in the US and Europe? Any insights there?
The big centers?
Sectors.
Okay, yeah, no, I think you have it everywhere, right? But I think what we see is, I think in green tech we see a lot of consolidation, right? I think we're of course some parts of the industry are still very immature and it's more at the VC and scale up phase, but other parts are more mature. And with the rapid growth, there also comes the need for more skill, right? Just in terms of access to raw materials, to logistics solutions that are now a problem worldwide, also talent. So there's a real need to consolidate, I think, in the whole green tech industry. And similarly on the software side, I think what we see what's happening in SaaS is also accelerate consolidation, because there's a war for talent ongoing, and you have to compete globally with the likes of Microsoft or Facebook or Google for talent. And you can only do that if you team up. So I think those are two sectors that we're seeing very hot in consolidation.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks, Joost. And then final question. Again, anyone who would like to answer, is there anything wrong with PE firms slapping bolt-ons together, which they acquire at a discount to the exit multiple, but not integrating them? And how should a PE firm think about buying merely for multiple arbitrage versus actually putting the effort in to integrate them? So basically, kind of what's wrong with? Is there anything wrong with kind of businesses just adding on businesses and continuing to kind of bolt on activity without integrating them? What are the issues with that?
Well, I think you arrive at a certain level of complexity where this simply adding on doesn't work. I mean, we at Coventya, we had 15 affiliates, again, running their own business to a certain extent, and we realized that we could not continue the same way. So there was my successor, the CFO, they started well ahead of exit to think of a new model, a new operating model, how to make it easier to manage. And that would have been true for a next LBO if it had happened. It did not, because the strategic price was just too high and could not be matched by private equity. But there is a point in time where you have to change. I mean, you cannot just continue doing the same thing, because for top management, it's out of range.
I couldn't agree more. I think the graveyard is littered with companies that kept on doing buy and build and not integrated. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then Andros, you're nodding in agreement there.
Yeah, very, very much so, because oftentimes that's when we're engaged, is when they've reached that point of diminishing returns to just doing more of the same, and the complexity cost has caught up with them in one form or another.
Yeah.
And that's when a rethink is required. But much better to have that thinking up front when you're constructing the platform. And I would say with more and more sophistication in DD, it's suboptimal to sell it just as a number of different parts.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope our conversation today has helped those looking to embark on a buy and build strategy, and kind of in the ways in which to consider the integration and the merger, and not just to keep adding on businesses, but actually really look at the management, the sales and marketing function, the culture, as you've all kind of highlighted, being one of the most important parts. But yes, because we have come to the end of our session, so thank you all so much for sharing your insights, and thank you to our audience for being so engaged and listening.